The Beatles' brain rot persists, so here's the story of the time John Lennon accidentally took LSD during a recording session. If you didn't know, yes, the Beatles did drugs. Gasp. I know, scandalous. Specifically, they did LSD for a while, which started when George Harrison and John Lennon were drugged, non-consensually, by their own dentist. How fun. But that's a story for another time. The day is March 21st, 1967, during the Sgt. Pepper recording sessions in Abbey Road Studios. In the studio, John, Paul, Beatles producer George Martin, George Harrison, and their friend Ivan Vaughn are working on recording songs for the soon-to-be hit record Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Ringo isn't present because they didn't need him for these recordings. George is chatting with Ivan, while George Martin is talking with John and Paul about a song. These sessions often ran for hours into the early morning, and John depended on uppers, that's amphetamines for those of you who don't know, to stay awake. So, this particular night, he does what he usually does, and takes out his little tin of drugs and pops what he thinks is an upper. Spoiler, it was not. After a little while, he starts looking really unwell. George Martin notices and asks John if he was alright. John says no, and George, thinking it's just a migraine or something, suggests that they go get some fresh air. So George takes him to the roof. In his defense, the only other option was going out front, which was not going to happen because, well, these are the Beatles, and they would be ripped to shreds by the hundreds of fans surrounding the building at any given time. So they go to the roof. Once on the roof, John looks up and is just enamored with the stars, more so than the usual sober person would. Still, George is oblivious as ever. George warns John to watch for the ledge as he walks around. Poor George must have felt so bad when he figured out what happened, because not only did he take John to the roof as he was tripping balls, but said roof only had a barrier of about 6 inches high standing between them and a 90-foot drop to the ground below. George himself recalls, the fact was that John was only too likely to imagine he could fly and launch himself off the low parapet that ran around the roof. John was up on that roof for much longer than a drugged-out person should be. At some point, George Harrison and Paul, continuing work on the song, notice that John has been away for a while. It doesn't take them very long to realize what was happening, that John had consumed something he shouldn't have, and that he was currently on the roof. They rush up to the roof in a panic, only to find John sitting safely, peacefully enjoying the stars. Once they convinced him to come back inside, they couldn't get much more work done that night, since John was essentially rendered useless. So they packed up early and went home. John had no way of getting home, though, so Paul, who lived just down the road, being the good friend that he was, brought him home to wait out the high. That night would also be marked as the first time Paul tried LSD, experienced a 6-hour-long trip with John, where they just kind of stared at each other. And that was the time John accidentally took LSD during a recording session.